What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with my comparison of the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G versus the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G. So let's get started. Now, as the name does imply, the A53 5G is the successor to last year's A52 5G. And if I had to guess, this phone is going to be very popular both in the US and all around the world, considering that Samsung really does give us a lot of value here for a mid-range smartphone. In fact, for most people, I would say that you're best off going with a device like one of these versus spending extra money for an S22 or S22 Ultra, considering that these phones offer really solid performance and nearly all the features that you'd want or need at a fraction of the price. So it's definitely really exciting that you don't have to spend $1,000 to get a decent smartphone nowadays. Now, in general, these two devices share more in common than what they have different, and for the most part, the A53 5G is just an evolution from the A52 5G. And what I mean by that is that these phones have a nearly identical design in the sense that the front panel layout looks pretty much the same, the button placement is pretty similar, and these two phones even have a very similar camera layout. The biggest difference with the camera modules, as you can see here, is that the A53 5G has a little bit more of a sleeker design to it compared to the A52 5G, but beyond that, the actual placement of all the various cameras pretty much look the same. Now, there's really two main differences between these two devices. Now, the first one is that with the A53 5G, there is no 3.5mm headphone jack, whereas we do have one here on the A52 5G. And then, this is actually a good thing for the A53 5G, this device has a more powerful processor compared to the A52 5G. But throughout this video, I'll be showing you all the various differences and similarities with these devices, so I hope you're ready for that. Now, another thing I want to point out as well is that there are some differences when it involves the packaging of these two phones. As you can see, the box for the A53 5G is quite a bit smaller compared to the A52 5G, which has a more traditional box design. Now, the reason for that is because with the A53 5G, we do not have a wall adapter included in the box, but we do have a double-sided USB-C cable for charging and data transfer. So that's at least good, but if you are expecting to get a wall adapter included, then just know that you're not getting one here with the A53 5G, and it seems like for the most part, that's what Samsung is going to be doing going forward with nearly all of their devices. Now, both of these phones feature 6.5-inch displays, and the displays are both Corning Gorilla Glass 5. So it is nice that they both have that enhanced, better glass, as it's going to make them pretty durable, especially compared to devices that don't have Corning Gorilla Glass 5. Now, another similarity as well is that both phones do feature Super AMOLED displays running at 120Hz. Now, they're also both 1080p displays. With the A53 5G, we have a PPI of 405 compared to a PPI of 407 with the A52 5G. Both phones have 20:9 aspect ratios, so it's kind of a more narrow but taller form factor. And with the A53 5G, we have a 85.4% screen-to-body ratio compared to an 84.1% screen-to-body ratio with the A52 5G. But just looking at these two phones face on, you can see here that they really do look nearly identical, as I mentioned earlier on in the video. And that's certainly not a bad thing. As you can see, both phones have very small bezels all throughout, and they both have hole punches for the front-facing cameras. But what's especially impressive with the front-facing cameras on these phones is that the actual hole punch is really very small. It's not annoying at all or intrusive as far as using the phones, so I'm definitely really glad that they are able to give us really nice 32 megapixel front-facing cameras on both of these devices in such a small housing. Now, the next similarity between these two phones is the amount of internal storage that you will be getting. Now, these devices are offered in two different storage configurations. You can get them in either 128 gigabytes or 256 gigabytes. And both phones feature microSD card expansion. So if you do find yourself filling up the internal storage on these phones, then you can always offload photos and videos, for example, onto a microSD card. That's especially helpful because many of the higher-end Android devices nowadays don't even offer microSD card expansion. And of course, if you want to compare these phones to an iPhone, for example, iPhones have never had microSD card expansion. So it's certainly really nice that both of these phones do have that feature, and they didn't get rid of it going from the A52 5G to the A53 5G. Now, neither of these two phones have wireless charging, but they do both feature fingerprint sensors built into the displays. So let's give that a try right now, starting off with the A53 5G. So nice and fast and accurate. One more time. So this phone really does have a nice in-display fingerprint sensor. It's certainly not as fast as the fingerprint sensor that you'd be getting with the S22, for example, but it also uses a different technology, whereas with the S22 and the other higher-end Samsung phones, it uses an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, whereas the technology for the fingerprint sensor on both this device and the A52 5G use a less advanced technology. But still, nonetheless, it does work really well. And then we'll give the fingerprint sensor on the A52 5G a try right now. Very quick. So definitely nice and responsive there too. So in general, I would say the accuracy of the fingerprint sensors on these two devices are pretty much equal, and it is possible that it is slightly better with the A53 5G, but there really isn't a meaningful difference between the two. Now, another awesome thing as well is that both phones do support Face Unlock, so I do appreciate that we do have multiple methods for accessing these phones. Now moving on, as far as the amount of RAM you're getting with these devices, it does depend on which configuration of the phones you do end up getting. So if you get these phones in 128 gigabytes of storage, you'll be getting 6 gigs of RAM. Whereas if you get these phones with 256 gigabytes of internal storage, you're getting 8 gigabytes of RAM. So certainly something worth keeping in mind there. Now the biggest difference between these two phones definitely has to be the processor that Samsung has decided to use. So with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we do have the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor compared to the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G, where we have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 750G processor. Now the good thing is that as the names do suggest of these devices, both processors do support 5G connectivity, so if you do want to use your carrier's 5G network, then you can do that here with either of these two phones. And as far as the actual processor performance goes, I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 5 on both phones, and here are the scores from those tests. So you can see with the A53 5G, I got a single core score of 741 compared to 459 with the A52 5G. And then as far as the multi-core score goes, it's a little bit more similar, but slightly higher here with the A53 5G. But especially when it comes to the single core score, this is quite a jump from one generation to the next. So I'm really glad to see that Samsung did decide to give the A53 5G a really good, fast, and efficient processor. As far as general performance goes with both phones, I really don't have any problems with either of them. They both run really smoothly, especially with that 120Hz display. The processors have no problem accommodating most tasks on either of these two phones. Now, as far as video recording goes, the situation is pretty much the same with both of these devices in the sense that they both support 4K video recording with both the rear and front-facing cameras, which is pretty impressive. And as far as battery capacity, we do have a slightly bigger battery with the Galaxy A53 5G at 5,000 milliamp hours compared to 4,500 milliamp hours with the A52 5G. What's awesome though is that both of these phones do support 25-watt fast charging. Of course, keep in mind that you will have to use a charger that does support 25-watt charging to actually get that here with either of these two phones. And for that matter, that's pretty standard with any smartphone. Now, as far as software goes, both devices at the time of recording this video are actually running Android 12 with Samsung's One UI 4.1. Of course, the A52 5G originally was launched with Android 11, but it has since gotten Android 12. And Samsung has recently revised their update policy, and I believe they're giving these phones 3, if not 4 years of major Android software updates. So that's really awesome, and especially for mid-range phones like these, because I remember it really wasn't too long ago that pretty much all the Android manufacturers really were reluctant to give us any major Android software updates, and especially updates within any sort of timely manner with any of their phones that weren't flagships. So it's nice that Samsung is finally getting serious here and giving their customers a lot of updates over an extended period of time. Now, both phones do have NFC. They also both feature IP67 dust and water resistance, which means you can take these phones underwater for up to 1 meter for up to 30 minutes, which is great. Another awesome thing as well is that both phones do feature stereo speakers, so if you are listening to music or watching a video, for example, you are going to be getting audio coming out of both the earpiece and the main speakers on the bottom of the phones, which is a nice premium touch. But getting back into the hardware differences between these two devices, like I mentioned, the front panels are pretty much identical here. In fact, if you were to throw a case on either of these two phones, it might actually be pretty difficult to distinguish which one is which. But on the other hand, I don't really think that's a terrible thing, considering that the A52 5G already has a really good design, and I can't really imagine what Samsung could have done with the A53 5G to actually make it any better. In general, I'm not really a big fan of companies changing things just for the sake of changing things. So unless Samsung had a really good reason to modify the design going from one generation to the next, then I'm totally fine with how things ended up here. Now I just realized I almost forgot to talk about the camera specifications, but those are also very similar with both phones. Now both devices do feature 64 megapixel main cameras. They also both feature 12 megapixel ultra wide angle cameras at 123 degrees. They both have 5 megapixel depth sensing cameras and 5 megapixel macro cameras. Now here's how things look on the camera apps on these devices. This is with the main camera on both. And I will say, at least when looking through the viewfinder, the colors do seem a lot better with the A53 5G. And in general, you are getting enhanced cameras with this device compared to the previous generation. But keep in mind that many of the actual camera features are very similar. So again, this is with the standard camera. Then from here, we can switch over to the ultra wide angle cameras, which does allow us to fit quite a bit more content into the frame. We can then go over to the More tab on both devices, and then from there, we can access the macro camera. So once we pull up the macro camera, we can get very close up here and have things be in really good, crisp detail. We can also head over to portrait mode to get those nice blurred out backgrounds, and then we can flip around and do portrait mode with the front cameras as well. So there's me right there. We can also do standard selfies as well. And if we want to, we can even do a group selfie, which means that the camera will crop out a little bit to make it easier to capture a selfie of a group. So that's another thing I like about these devices. Even though they are mid-range smartphones, we're not losing out on really any camera features, maybe besides a telephoto camera, but that's about it. Otherwise, we're getting a bunch of different cameras, different options, and really, again, all kinds of different features. So it's certainly nice that we're getting lots of options and abilities with both devices, despite them being mid-range smartphones. Now, there really aren't any major differences when it comes to the build quality of these phones. They do both have plastic backs, and I appreciate that the backs on both phones have a matte finish, which means that they're not going to pick up fingerprints. So even though I've been using both of these phones, you can see that you can't see any fingerprints on them at all. Then taking a look at the right side of both phones, we have volume up, volume down, and the power button. Then up top here, on the Galaxy A53 5G, we just have the noise canceling microphone, and then with the A52 5G, we have the noise canceling microphone, and then we have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card. Then on the left side of the phones, we have nothing, and then on the bottom of both devices, with the A53 5G, we have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the main speaker. And then with the A52 5G, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker on the phone. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, and as you can see here, there is no 3.5mm headphone jack to be found with the A53 5G, so that feature was unfortunately removed from the A52 5G. So in conclusion, which of these two phones is worth getting? Well, both are worth getting in the sense that they're both good options. However, I think it is worth considering that there's not really much of a difference going from the A52 5G to the A53 5G. Now, the A53 5G is not worse than the A52 5G in any ways besides the removal of the 3.5mm headphone jack. So if you do want a headphone jack, then the A52 5G is the only phone of these two that you can go with. So besides that, the only reason to actually go with the A52 5G is if you can get this phone for a cheaper price than the A53 5G. But that really depends on the pricing and availability of either of these two phones at the time that you're looking to buy either of them. But most importantly, I'm curious to know what you think. Which would you prefer? Do you think the Galaxy A53 5G is a worthy upgrade over the Galaxy A52 5G? Or do you think Samsung should have done a bit more here? Definitely let me know in the comment section below, but this concludes my comparison of the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G versus the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G. But make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.